Have you ever carried a secret so heavy, so deeply buried, that it felt like it had become part of your very bones? A pain you never dared to speak, shaping every breath you took, every choice you made for decades. That was my life. My name is Alina Vance, and I'm in my late 70s now, living in the quiet, unassuming town of Maple Grove, nestled in the heart of New England. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone and appearances, well, they mean everything. Just a few months ago, my husband, Arthur, passed. And with him, a shield I hadn't realized I relied on so heavily. Arthur was a good man, steady and kind. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but in his quiet way, he'd always buffered me from the sharper edges of the world. More importantly, he'd always, without ever fully acknowledging it aloud, kept a certain shadow at bay. Now, that shadow felt like it was creeping into every corner of my modest home, chilling the air that used to feel so safe. That shadow, you see, has a name. Robert Sterling, my older brother. To the world, Robert is a pillar of the community, charismatic, successful, a man of influence. He's known for his generous philanthropy, his booming laugh, the way he commands a room. People here in Maple Grove look up to him, admire him. They see a devoted brother, a caring son. They see the man who took care of everything after our parents passed. What they don't see, what they could never see, is the quiet, insidious control he's wielded over me since we were children. It wasn't physical, not in the way most people think of abuse. It was a constant, subtle chipping away at my self-worth, a psychological torment woven into the fabric of our family life. A cutting remark masked as concern, a decision made for me for my own good. A constant belittling that taught me my opinions didn't matter, my voice wasn't worth hearing. Arthur, in his presence, always seemed to make Robert soften, just a bit. Or perhaps, Robert just respected Arthur enough to keep his deeper manipulations from surfacing directly. But with Arthur gone, there was nothing between me and the full force of Robert's will. The moment came just last week. Robert, dressed in his crisp suit, smelling of expensive cologne and authority, sat across from me in my living room, the very room where Arthur and I had shared so many quiet evenings. He spoke of my grief and my fragility, his voice oozing with a concern that felt utterly false. He proposed, rather than suggested, that I move into the Springwood assisted living facility. "For your own comfort, Alina," he'd said, "and for your safety." Then he added, almost as an afterthought, that he would, of course, manage my finances. He used words like investment strategies and estate planning. But what I heard was, "I am taking over. You are incapable. You are mine to control." My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic drum against the cage of my ribs. The same terror that had frozen me in childhood, that had made me silent and compliant for a lifetime, resurfaced with suffocating force. I felt the walls closing in, not just the familiar walls of my home, but the invisible walls of a prison I'd inhabited for so long. Trapped, voiceless, just as I always had been around him. For too long, I let that silence define me. I believed I had no voice, that my truth was insignificant, that my feelings didn't matter. It's easy to believe that when someone you're supposed to trust spends a lifetime telling you it's so. But what I'm learning now, in the quiet aftermath of so much loss, is that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that have been held closest, the ones that finally break free. If you've ever felt overlooked, or unheard, or like your story was just too complicated to share, you're not alone. I understand. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing my journey of finding my voice, it can help someone else find theirs too. If my story resonates with you, or if you've ever found strength in unexpected places, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. It helps more than you know to build a community where these raw, true stories of survival and justice can be shared. The chill in the air of my own home wasn't from a draft. It was the reawakening of old, deep fears. Robert's words, assisted living, managing your finances, weren't just about my future. They were an echo of my past. As I sat there, the silence pressing in, my mind began to replay scenes, fragmented memories that were less like recollections and more like open wounds. I remembered being 7, proudly showing Robert a drawing I'd made for my teacher. He'd taken it, admired it for a moment, then with a sympathetic sigh pointed out how the tree was a little crooked, how the sun was not quite round enough. He'd smiled, of course, a warm, encouraging smile, but I remember feeling a tiny, cold pebble drop into my stomach. The next day, I didn't give the drawing to my teacher. That was Robert's genius. Not outright cruelty, but a subtle, constant undermining. He made you doubt yourself so completely that you simply stopped trying. Later in high school, when I'd finally mustered the courage to try out for the school play, Robert had filled my head with helpful advice. Your voice isn't strong enough, a leaner. You always forget your lines when you're nervous. It's probably best you don't embarrass yourself. I pulled out at the last minute, feigning a sudden cold. And I bought his explanation then, just as I'd bought so many others. He wasn't stopping me. He was protecting me. From failure, from judgment, from myself. He'd always played the role of my protector, my wise older brother, and it was a role the town had readily embraced. It wasn't just me, though. Looking back, I saw the patterns. Old Mr. Henderson down the street, who'd mysteriously lost control of his small business just before Robert's investment firm conveniently rescued it. Or Aunt Carol, who'd left a surprisingly small inheritance, despite owning a sizable piece of farmland, with Robert as the sole executor. People would sometimes make offhand comments. Robert always lands on his feet, doesn't he? Or that sterling boy, sharp as a tack, always gets what he wants. Arthur, bless his heart, had seen it too, in his quiet way. I remember once, after a family dinner where Robert had dominated the conversation, Arthur had simply squeezed my hand and said, "He has a way of making his truth everyone's truth, doesn't he, love?" At the time, I just nodded, but now, that simple comment felt like a profound warning. Arthur had protected me from a lot, but he couldn't protect me from the years of conditioning that had turned me into a woman who silenced herself. My mind wrestled with itself. Part of me, the part that had been a leaner Vance for 70-odd years, wanted to simply capitulate. It felt easier. It's too late, Alina. You're old, you're tired. Robert knows best. This is just the natural order of things. The thought of fighting Robert, of challenging his carefully constructed public image, felt like trying to punch a hole through a mountain. The shame of public exposure, the fear of his retaliation, the exhaustion of even contemplating such a battle. It was overwhelming. But then a flicker. A tiny, stubborn spark ignited somewhere deep inside me, a place I thought had gone completely dark. It was the whisper of something Arthur had said before he passed, something about my strength. Or perhaps it was the memory of my mother's quiet defiance, a trait I'd always admired but never thought I possessed. I saw Robert's smug face, heard his condescending tone, and a fierce, unexpected wave of self-preservation washed over me. No, not this time. He would not take everything. He would not erase me. It wasn't a roar of rebellion, not yet. It was a silent, internal vow. I wouldn't go into that assisted living facility. I wouldn't hand over my life, my memories, my very self. And suddenly, a half-forgotten memory surfaced. An old, worn wooden box. It had been my mother's, I think, tucked away under the guest bed, full of old letters and something else. A journal, perhaps. I remembered her scribbling in it late at night, long after Robert and I were supposedly asleep. I hadn't looked at it in decades, but now it felt like a tiny, fragile thread to a past that might hold the key to my future. That old wooden box. It had been years, decades even, since I'd thought of it. It sat beneath my guest bed, covered in a fine layer of dust, a forgotten relic from a life I'd tried to bury. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled it out, the wood cool and smooth beneath my touch. Inside, nestled amongst bundles of yellowed letters tied with faded ribbons, lay a small, leather-bound book, my mother's journal. I remembered her writing in it, late at night, by the flickering glow of her bedside lamp, her brow often furrowed with a look I hadn't understood then. But now, a pang of recognition tightened my chest. Her death when I was just a teenager had been sudden, a swift illness no one truly explained. Robert, of course, had taken charge, handling everything with his usual efficiency, leaving no room for questions or lingering grief. He'd simply declared it for the best that we move on. Now, holding her journal, it felt as though a piece of her, a piece of a truth I'd never known, was finally within my grasp. I opened the journal to a random page, the ink faded but still legible. Her elegant script filled the lines, describing ordinary days mixed with observations that sent a shiver down my spine. Robert's charm is a double-edged sword, one entry read. He can twist words so subtly, you question your own memory. Today, he convinced our father that Alina had agreed to sell her prize-winning pumpkin patch to him, even though she wept when she heard. My breath hitched. The pumpkin patch. I remembered that. The raw, bitter disappointment of losing it, followed by Robert's soothing explanation that it was too much work for a little girl, that he was helping me. I'd believed him then. He'd made me believe him. Another entry later. He convinced Mrs. Henderson to invest her inheritance with him, promising outlandish returns. Poor woman has no idea he's taking a substantial cut for himself. It chills me how easily he manipulates. We must protect Alina from this cunning in him. My mother had written that. My mother, who rarely spoke ill of anyone. The words jumped off the page, confirming the whispers of my own childhood fears, giving them weight and form. But then my lifelong habit of doubt began to creep in. I flipped through more pages. Some entries were mundane, about garden chores or recipes. Was Mother simply a worrier? I wondered, my fingers tracing the faded script. Was her mind, perhaps? Not as sharp as it should have been in those last few years. Robert had always implied our mother was prone to dramatics, that she imagined things. His voice, so often gentle but firm, echoed in my mind, dismissing her concerns as the ramblings of an overly sensitive woman. And then there was Robert's perfect image, the pillar of the community, the benefactor. How could such a respected man be the subtle manipulator my mother described? It felt impossible. My mind, conditioned for so long to trust his narrative, struggled to reconcile the two images. Maybe I was just looking for anything to justify my sudden fear of him. Don't be silly, Alina. You're just a grieving old woman, imagining things in an old diary. This self-doubt, carefully cultivated by Robert over decades, was my biggest enemy. It was the false lead, planted deep within my own psyche, that kept me from fully trusting my instincts. Yet a recurring theme in the journal kept tugging at my attention. My mother constantly mentioned a need to maintain appearances for Robert's sake, to protect his future. There was an unspoken family rule, almost an unspoken command. Robert's image must remain untarnished, no matter the cost. She wrote about sweeping things under the rug and keeping up a brave face for the family's sake. It hinted at a deeper, darker secret, a core truth that had been hidden to preserve Robert's spotless reputation. And I realized, with a chilling certainty, that I had been a willing participant in that silence, albeit unknowingly, for my entire life. My mother's journal lay open on my lap, its pages whispering secrets that had been buried for far too long. The initial wave of doubt, that familiar self-questioning Robert had so expertly instilled, began to recede as I devoured more of her words. She wasn't rambling, she was meticulously documenting. And as I read, a chilling pattern began to emerge, connecting threads of memory I hadn't realized were linked. I recalled Mrs. Davies, our elderly next-door neighbor when I was a girl. She'd been a sweet, somewhat flighty woman, devoted to her prize-winning rose garden. My mother had mentioned in the journal that Robert had convinced Mrs. Davies to let him manage her small investments, promising to double her returns for a new greenhouse. A few months later, Mrs. Davies was selling off her furniture, saying her investments hadn't panned out and she had to downsize. Robert, ever the concerned young man, had helped her move into a smaller apartment. At the time, I just accepted it, thinking it was a shame. Now, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Was that another one of his gifts? But the most striking entry, the one that truly shattered my lingering self-doubt, detailed what happened with our Aunt Beatrice. Dear, sweet Aunt Beatrice, who lived a simple life on the outskirts of Maple Grove, known for her delicious apple pies and her quiet generosity. My mother's entry read, Robert has convinced Beatrice to sign over her small inheritance from Uncle Silas to him, claiming it's for a community fund he's establishing. He promised her a prominent plaque, a legacy. She doesn't realize he's just lining his own pockets. He made it sound like her idea, so selfless of her. My heart aches for her naivete. I remembered Aunt Beatrice's excitement back then, her pride in contributing to Robert's grand community vision. And then, a few years later, when she'd needed funds for an urgent medical procedure, she'd been forced to sell her modest cottage. Robert, of course, had swooped in, generously, helping her find a smaller, cheaper place to rent, lamenting that the community fund was unfortunately tied up in long-term investments. Everyone had praised his devotion. I saw it all so clearly now. It wasn't a gift from Aunt Beatrice. It was theft, cloaked in manipulation and public goodwill. The sheer audacity of it, the chilling precision of his methods, struck me like a physical blow. Robert hadn't just manipulated me, his younger sister, out of insecurity and a pumpkin patch. H. He hadn't just, perhaps, drained Mrs. Davies' funds. He had systematically preyed on the vulnerable, the trusting, the elderly in our very own town, all while building his glittering facade of success and philanthropy. The whispers of the past, Arthur's quiet disapproval, Mr. Henderson's sudden business woes, Aunt Carol's meager inheritance, they weren't just isolated incidents. They were pieces of a much larger, darker mosaic. They were evidence of a predator hiding in plain sight. It was never about what he could get from me, specifically. It was about his insatiable need for control, for power, for wealth, regardless of the cost to others. My own abuse, the years of feeling small and unheard, wasn't just a personal failing on my part. It was a testament to his lifelong pattern. He molded people, including me, to serve his own agenda, then discarded them when they were no longer useful, or when he'd taken everything he could. The realization was liberating, in a strange, painful way. It meant I wasn't just a victim of circumstance or my own weakness. I was a target in a much larger, more calculated game. And now I had a weapon, the truth. The journal lay beside me, a silent, damning witness. The revelations about Robert's history, the cold, calculated way he'd manipulated not just me but Aunt Beatrice and Mrs. Davies, left me feeling a strange mixture of clarity and overwhelming dread. This wasn't just about my fear of him anymore. It was about protecting others, about exposing a pattern of cruelty. But how? How does a woman who has spent her life being silenced suddenly find her voice, let alone take down a man as powerful and respected as Robert Sterling? The thought of facing him alone, armed only with my mother's faded entries and my own fragile memories, was paralyzing. I needed help, real help, not the kind that soothed, but the kind that acted. My mind immediately went to Martha. Martha, my neighbor, a woman with a kind smile and eyes that missed nothing. She was a retired social worker, I remembered, the kind who'd seen all sorts of human darkness. She had a quiet strength about her, a way of listening that made you feel truly heard. But even thinking about confiding in her made my palms sweat. This wasn't idle gossip. This was my family's deepest, ugliest secret. My hand hovered over the phone for what felt like an eternity. What if she doesn't believe me? What if she thinks I'm just an old woman grieving, imagining things? Robert's insidious whispers of self-doubt echoed in my mind. But then I looked at the journal again, at my mother's steady hand, writing the truth no one wanted to see. I had to try. I dialed Martha's number, my fingers clumsy. "Eleanor, is everything all right, dear?" Her voice was warm, immediately calming some of the frantic buzzing in my head. "Martha," I managed, my voice a fragile whisper. Could you come over? There's something important I need to show you. It's about Robert." She was at my door within 15 minutes, a sympathetic look on her face. I led her to the living room, feeling like a character in a suspense novel. I sat her down and with trembling hands placed my mother's journal in front of her, open to the entries about Robert. This is my mother S., I began, my voice catching. "She wrote it before she died, and it talks about Robert." Martha picked it up, her brow furrowed as she began to read. She'd nod occasionally, a thoughtful hum escaping her lips. As she read, I found myself, for the very first time, speaking aloud the memories I'd held captive for so long. The pumpkin patch incident, the play, the countless times Robert had subtly twisted my words, undermined my confidence, convinced me that his way was always the best, the only way. It was a torrent of suppressed feelings, bubbling to the surface. It was painful, yes, but also liberating. With each word I spoke, the heavy weight I'd carried began to lift, just a fraction. Martha closed the journal gently, her gaze soft but unwavering. She looked at me, truly saw me, in a way no one else ever had. "Eleanor," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "What you've described, what your mother wrote, this isn't the ramblings of an old woman, dear. This is a classic pattern of narcissistic abuse. And the financial elements you're hinting at, with Aunt Beatrice and Mrs. Davies, that sounds like financial exploitation of the elderly." Her words hit me with the force of a revelation. Narcissistic abuse, financial exploitation. These were terms, concepts that gave form to the amorphous dread that had haunted me. It wasn't just Robert being Robert. It was a recognized pattern of harmful behavior. "You're not imagining things, Eleanor," Martha continued, her voice gentle. And you are absolutely not alone. This is real, and it's serious. The immense relief that washed over me was almost dizzying. It was as if a lifetime of gaslighting had been undone in a single moment. I wasn't. Crazy. My mother wasn't crazy. Robert was the problem. So, what do? I whispered, a fragile tendril of hope beginning to unfurl in my chest. Martha's expression turned grim. You need legal help, Alina. Not just any lawyer, but someone who understands these kinds of intricate family dynamics, someone who knows how to navigate the waters of elder abuse. Someone discreet but relentless. I know just the person. Martha was true to her word. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a small, unassuming office, facing a woman named Sarah Jenkins. Sarah wasn't what I expected from a lawyer. She was sharp, yes, with intelligent, kind eyes that seemed to take everything in. But there was also a quiet intensity about her, a compassionate demeanor that immediately put me at ease. Martha had explained Sarah specialized in elder abuse cases and often worked pro bono, sensing that something deeper was at play. I presented my mother's journal, the physical embodiment of my suppressed fears. Sarah listened patiently as I recounted the stories I'd just begun to fully acknowledge: Robert's subtle barbs, the manipulated pumpkin patch, Aunt Beatrice's gift. Sarah handled the worn leather journal with reverence, turning its delicate pages, her expression unreadable. This is compelling, Alina, she said finally, her voice thoughtful. Your mother's observations, combined with your own memories, paint a very clear picture of psychological and emotional abuse. And the financial details you've uncovered about Aunt Beatrice, that's a strong indication of a pattern. She paused, looking directly at me. But for legal purposes, it's not definitive proof. It's a powerful narrative, a motive, but we need hard evidence. Paper trails, dates, signatures. My heart sank a little. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but hearing it confirmed that the mountain I faced was still formidable. Yet, Sarah's calm confidence was reassuring. We start small, Alina, she explained, a glint in her eye. We start with public records. So our quiet investigation began. From my living room, with Sarah on speakerphone or occasionally sitting beside me, we delved into the digital world, a place I rarely ventured. Sarah, with her expertise, guided me through databases and archives, searching for anything connected to Robert Sterling. It was tedious, sometimes frustrating work, but with each layer we peeled back, a clearer, more unsettling image of my brother began to emerge. We started with his much-touted philanthropic ventures. Robert was renowned for his generosity, constantly making large donations to local charities and community projects where we quickly discovered he also held significant positions on the boards. On the surface, it looked impeccable. But as Sarah dug deeper, the paper trail became murkier than it should have been. Funds moved between accounts with unusual frequency. Some donations seemed to disappear into administrative fees, and the overall financial transparency was opaque, to say the least. It was enough to raise a lawyer's eyebrow, even if it wasn't yet conclusive. Then came the true shock. Deep within a tangled web of past business filings, Sarah unearthed records of unusually large, anonymous transfers. These funds weren't going to or from known charitable organizations. They were flowing into a shell company linked to one of Robert's older, less publicized business ventures from about 10 years ago. The company's name was innocuous enough, something like Sterling Legacy Holdings, but its financial activity was anything but. This is highly unusual, Alina, Sarah murmured, her brow furrowed as she scanned the digital ledger. These amounts are substantial, and the transfers are designed to be almost untraceable. It looks like a classic money laundering setup. My mind flashed back to something my mother had written in her journal. He's always had a knack for making money disappear, then reappear in his own pocket, disguised as something else. I fear what he truly does with his investments. The whispers of the past weren't just about emotional manipulation. They were about something far more sinister, something with serious legal implications. This wasn't just about my inheritance or Aunt Beatrice's small fund. This was about a pattern of financial misconduct, perhaps on a grander scale, stretching back years, hidden behind Robert's polished facade. The stakes suddenly felt infinitely higher. The days that followed felt like a quiet war being waged beneath the surface of Maple Grove's calm exterior. Robert, accustomed to immediate compliance, clearly sensed my shift. My polite but firm deferrals regarding the assisted living facility, my vague answers about needing more time to think, clearly agitated him. The phone calls became more frequent, his tone subtly shifting from caring concern to thinly veiled impatience, then to something colder, sharper. "Eleanor," he'd begun one evening, his voice a low W purr of warning. "People in this town talk. They see your house, quiet and empty, and they wonder if you're doing all right. If you're coping. A woman your age, alone after Arthur, well, it's only natural for folks to worry. It'd be a shame for you to give them more to talk about by making unwise decisions." It was a clear threat, a promise of social ostracization, of whispering campaigns, of the kind of public scrutiny he knew I'd always dreaded. He was trying to isolate me, to cut off any nascent support I might be finding. He even started making veiled comments to our distant relatives, implying my grief was affecting my judgment, that I was becoming confused. Old tricks, expertly deployed. But this time they didn't work. Not fully. Bolstered by Martha's unwavering support and Sarah's strategic guidance, a new kind of strength settled within me. It wasn't a loud, defiant strength, but a quiet, stubborn resilience, like an old oak tree that bends in the storm but never breaks. He can't control me anymore, I thought, a revelation that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Not if I don't let him. The true confrontation came on a crisp autumn afternoon when Robert, growing exasperated by my resistance, unexpectedly showed up at my door. He hadn't called. He just arrived, a grim set to his jaw, his eyes narrowed. He looked around my living room, almost disdainfully, as if trying to reassert his ownership over the space over me. "Eleanor," he began, his voice losing its sugary edge, "this has gone on long enough. I've made arrangements. The movers are scheduled for next Tuesday. You'll be at Springwood by then, and I'll handle the sale of this house. It's for your own good. You're simply not capable of managing all this on your own." My heart pounded, but a strange calm settled over me. This was it. The moment I dreaded for a lifetime. But this time I wasn't alone. I thought of Martha's validating words, of Sarah's quiet determination, and most importantly, of my mother's journal, its truth burning in my mind. I took a slow, steady breath. "Capable?" I asked, my voice, to my own surprise, remarkably steady. "Is that what you truly think, Robert? Or is it that you prefer people to be incapable so you can manage them as you see fit?" He flinched, a subtle tightening around his eyes. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by me. "What are you talking about, Eleanor?" His voice was sharp now, an edge of irritation creeping in. "I'm talking about how you've always managed things, Robert," I continued, a new boldness swelling in my chest. I watched his face carefully. "How you managed Aunt Beatrice's inheritance into a community fund that somehow only benefited you. How you managed Mrs. Davies' investments right into her insolvency. You have a knack for it, don't you? For making things disappear only to reappear in your own pocket." His face, normally so smooth and controlled, became a mask of cold fury. The veneer of the benevolent, charming brother cracked, revealing a chilling glimpse of the ruthless man beneath. His eyes, usually warm and confident, now held a glint of genuine menace. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And you'll regret this, Eleanor. You'll regret crossing me." He took a step towards me, his presence suddenly looming, oppressive. For a fleeting second, the old terror resurfaced, the little girl who instinctively shrunk from his displeasure. But then I straightened my shoulders. I was no longer that little girl. "Oh, I think I have a very clear idea, Robert," I said, meeting his gaze directly. My voice was quiet, but it held a new firmness, a power he had never heard from me. "And I don't think I'm the one who'll be doing the regretting." He stared at me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and pure, unadulterated rage. He'd completely underestimated me, believing that after Arthur's passing, I was nothing more than a frail, easily manipulated old woman. He saw me as a pawn in his game, not an opponent. And that, I realized, was his gravest mistake. This wasn't the final move, not by a long shot, but it was the first time I had truly stood my ground, and the look on his face confirmed. The game had changed. The confrontation with Robert, that moment I finally spoke my truth, had cracked something open inside me. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now laced with a fierce determination. I wasn't shrinking anymore, and that newfound resolve fueled Sarah's investigation. She worked tirelessly, digging through more public records, following the faint financial trails Robert thought he'd erased. One afternoon, a few days after Robert's unexpected visit, Sarah called me, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and grim satisfaction. "Eleanor," she began, "you were right. More right than we ever imagined. It's not just you. It's not just Aunt Beatrice or Mrs. Davies. Robert has been systematically defrauding vulnerable people across the community for years. His philanthropic ventures, they're nothing but fronts. Shell companies, fake charities, manipulated legal documents. He's been diverting donations, exaggerating expenses, and funneling money directly into his own pockets. He uses his charm, his respected position, to gain trust, then he bleeds them dry." My stomach clenched. "How many, Sarah?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We've found evidence for at least 5 other cases so far," she said. "All elderly individuals, most of whom had no close family to monitor their affairs. And the amounts, they're significant. Hundreds of thousands, possibly millions. This isn't just about your inheritance, Eleanor. This is about a career criminal masquerading as a pillar of society. This is elder fraud on a grand scale." The revelation left me breathless. Robert wasn't just a controlling brother. He was a predator. A wolf in sheep's clothing, preying on the very people he claimed to serve. The cost for him, I realized, wouldn't just be the loss of his reputation or my money. It would be the complete dismantling of his carefully constructed life, the exposure of every lie he'd ever told. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice gaining strength. "How do we expose him?" This was where my intimate, decades-long knowledge of Robert came into play. Sarah, brilliant as she was with legal strategy, didn't know the intricate workings of Robert's mind, his predictable arrogance, his fatal flaw, his profound tendency to underestimate anyone he perceived as weaker than himself, especially me. We began to devise a plan. It wasn't about a sudden, dramatic confrontation. It was about setting a trap that Robert, in his hubris, wouldn't see coming. We considered many angles, anonymously leaking information to the local press, approaching the district attorney directly. But given Robert's influence, we knew we needed something undeniable, something that would force his hand. "He loves to be seen as the rescuer, the problem solver," I told Sarah. "He loves to control the narrative. If he thinks he's in control, he'll talk, he'll boast, he'll reveal too much." We decided on a strategy that leveraged his need for control and his public image. Sarah would arrange a private consultation with Robert, ostensibly about my legal affairs and the assisted living proposal. The goal wasn't to get him to confess, but to corner him into revealing his patterns, his lack of remorse, and perhaps even hint at the wider scope of his schemes, all while under the guise of an amicable discussion. The subtle details, the way he shifted his weight, the flicker in his eyes, the exact phrases he used. I would be watching, listening, armed with my newfound understanding of him. This plan was risky. It meant stepping back into his presence, facing the man who had tormented me for a lifetime. It meant laying bare our family's dirty laundry, exposing the carefully guarded secrets that had kept him powerful. The emotional stakes were incredibly high. My entire life, I had been the silent victim, the one who avoided conflict at all costs. But now, the payoff wasn't just about reclaiming my money. It was about reclaiming my voice, my autonomy, my very self. It was about proving, not just to Robert but to myself, that Eleanor Vance was not a frail, easily disposable old woman. I was a survivor, and I was about to become a strategist. The day of reckoning arrived, as all such days eventually must. Sarah, with her quiet determination, had arranged a special community forum at the old Maple Grove Town Hall. Ostensibly, it was a meeting to discuss elder care and financial security, a topic designed to pique Robert's interest, knowing he'd want to be seen as the authority. But for me, it was the moment to finally shatter the silence that had imprisoned me for a lifetime. My hands were clammy, a familiar coldness gripping my stomach, but a different kind of resolve pulsed through me. I wasn't the same Eleanor who had cowered from Robert's shadow. I walked into the crowded hall with Sarah by my side, her presence a silent fortress. Robert was there, of course, seated at the head table, radiating his usual charm, a confident smile plastered on his face. He nodded to me, a dismissive, patronizing gesture that used to make me shrink. Not anymore. Sarah began with a professional overview of elder financial abuse, her voice calm and authoritative. Then, she turned to me. "Mrs. Vance, perhaps you could share some of your personal experiences regarding financial security." My heart hammered against my ribs. The room felt suddenly too small, too hot. But I looked at Sarah, then at the worn copy of my mother's journal clutched in my lap. That journal, filled with my mother's truth, became my anchor. I cleared my throat, and to my surprise, my voice, though still soft, didn't tremble. "For most of my life," I began, my gaze sweeping across faces in the audience, I believed my older brother, Robert Sterling, was my protector, my caretaker. I believed him when he said he always knew best. I believed him when he managed my affairs, even as a young girl when he convinced me to let go of things I cherished, for my own good. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Robert shifted uncomfortably, his smile faltering. Then I spoke of Aunt Beatrice. I read directly from my mother's journal, my voice steady as I exposed how Robert had manipulated our trusting aunt out of her inheritance. I spoke of Mrs. Davies, of her sudden financial woes after Robert had helped her with investments. And then I laid bare his recent proposal, his thinly veiled threats to put me in an assisted living facility and take control of everything I had left. As I spoke, the atmosphere in the room changed. Robert's confident posture stiffened. Whispers rippled through the audience. Faces turned from him to me, then back to him, a dawning realization in their eyes. Then Sarah stepped forward, her voice resonating through the room. "Mrs. Vance's story, while deeply personal, is not unique. Over the past few weeks, we've quietly investigated several other cases in our community. Cases involving other elderly citizens, all of whom entrusted their finances to Mr. Robert Sterling." Suddenly, from the audience, a woman stood up. It was Margaret, Aunt Beatrice's niece, her face etched with years of unspoken suspicion. "My aunt always talked about that community fund Robert set up," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "She swore she'd contributed to it, but when she needed money for her medical bills, Robert told her it was all tied up. We always wondered." Then another voice, and another. Families of other victims Sarah had quietly contacted in recent days, emboldened by my courage, began to share their own suppressed stories. Tales of donations that never quite reached their intended recipients, of investments that vanished, of documents mysteriously signed against their loved ones' wishes. It was a cascade of truth, shattering Robert's carefully constructed public image piece by excruciating piece. Robert, his face pale, tried to interrupt, to denounce us all as liars, as confused old women, but his voice lacked its usual force. The audience, now fully engaged, hushed him with angry murmurs. The weight of combined testimonies, backed by the initial findings Sarah had, was undeniable. As the last witness spoke, a solemn hush fell over the room. Robert looked around, his eyes darting, finally meeting mine. In that moment, I saw not the charismatic brother, but a cornered animal stripped bare. His face contorted, a mask of fury and desperation. Just then, two plainclothes officers who had been discreetly present at Sarah's request stepped forward. "Robert Sterling," one officer stated, his voice clear and resonant, "you are under arrest for multiple counts of elder fraud, financial exploitation, and operating fraudulent charitable schemes. You have the right to remain silent." The words were a balm to my soul. Robert's carefully constructed world, built on lies and manipulation, was crumbling around him. The cost of his actions, not just financially but reputationally, was finally publicly revealed. He was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of shock and disbelief, the crowd parting silently around him. He looked at me once more, and in his eyes I saw not just rage, but a chilling flicker of utter defeat. The monster I'd feared for a lifetime was finally, irrevocably, unmasked. The days and weeks that followed Robert's arrest were a strange mix of profound relief and a deep, lingering exhaustion. It was as if a lifetime's worth of tension had finally uncoiled, leaving my body trembling but my spirit surprisingly light. The initial media frenzy in Maple Grove eventually died down, though Robert Sterling's name would forever be synonymous with scandal, his once pristine image irrevocably shattered. His public reckoning had been brutal, swift, and utterly devastating for him. Sarah, true to her word, worked diligently to reclaim my rightful finances. The shell companies were untangled, the fraudulent transfers reversed, and my savings, once seemingly lost, were eventually restored. It was an immense practical relief, of course, but what felt truly restored was something far more precious: my sense of self-worth. The chains of Robert's manipulation, woven so subtly over decades, had finally snapped. I no longer lived in fear. The constant, nagging doubt that had been my unwelcome companion was gone. I could trust my own judgment, my own perceptions, my own voice. It was a liberation I hadn't dared to dream of. My little home in Maple Grove, once a sanctuary Arthur had built and then a place where shadows began to creep, now felt truly mine, infused with a newfound lightness. The silence was no longer oppressive, it was peaceful, and I wasn't alone. Ma. Artha, with her steady presence and unwavering belief in me, became a constant source of comfort. We'd share cups of tea, sometimes in silence, sometimes discussing the ripple effects of Robert's downfall in the community. She understood the unspoken weight of these experiences. And Sarah, the sharp, compassionate lawyer who had helped me navigate the treacherous legal waters, became more than just my attorney. She became a cherished friend, a younger sister in spirit. We'd meet regularly, not just about the case's lingering details, but about life, about the future. They were my chosen family, these two women who had helped me find my footing when my world felt like it was crumbling. The sense of purpose that had ignited within me during the investigation didn't fade with Robert's incarceration. In fact, it grew stronger. I realized that my untold story, the years of quiet abuse, the methodical way I'd pieced together Robert's pattern, the courage it took to speak out, could be a beacon for others. I began volunteering at Sarah's small firm, helping her with preliminary interviews for new elder abuse cases. My lived experience gave me an uncanny ability to spot the subtle signs of manipulation, the fear in an elderly person's eyes, the carefully chosen words that hinted at a hidden tormentor. I wasn't a lawyer or a social worker, but I had something else: empathy born from direct experience. I could see the Robert Sterlings in other people's lives, often before anyone else. Sometimes I'd speak at small community gatherings, sharing my story, not for pity, but for empowerment. I talked about the insidious nature of control, about trusting your gut instincts, about the importance of reaching out for help, even when fear makes it feel impossible. My focus wasn't on Robert's downfall, but on the redefinition of my life, and the hope that my journey could inspire others to reclaim theirs. My purpose, I realized, wasn't to dwell on the past, but to ensure that no one else in Maple Grove or beyond had to endure what I had endured in silence. My untold story had become a tool for justice, a voice for the voiceless. My journey, from a life overshadowed by silence and fear to one of courage and advocacy, has been long and at times incredibly painful. But standing here today, free from the shadow of Robert's manipulation, I know it was a journey I had to take. My story, Alina Vance's story, is proof that age does not diminish your voice, your worth, or your right to justice. It is never too late to reclaim what was taken from you, whether it's your sense of self, your peace of mind, or your financial security. If you have experienced anything like what I've described, please know this: you are not alone. The fear can be crippling, and the silence can feel like the only safe place. But there are people who will listen, who will believe you, and who will help you find your way out. Speaking your truth, even in a whisper at first, is the most powerful step you can take. It's a step toward healing, toward freedom, and toward ensuring that those who seek to harm others are held accountable. If my story resonated with you, if it sparked a flicker of recognition or a surge of hope, I invite you to become part of our community. Please like this video to help share this message of resilience. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories of survival and justice, stories that remind us of the incredible strength of the human spirit. And most importantly, if you feel moved to do so, please share your own experiences or words of encouragement in the comments below. Let's create a space where everyone feels heard, seen, and supported. Your voice matters, and together we can empower each other. If you or someone you know needs help, please don't hesitate to reach out to local elder abuse hotlines or support organizations. Your courage can change lives.